Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Larson, and I'm one of the language arts TOSAs. I wanted to take a few minutes today just to share a little bit about our standards-based grading and what that looks like for multiple opportunities in language arts. As many of you know, we work with Teachers College in the reading and writing workshop model. And so what that's going to look like is going to be our kind of idea of what a class begins with choice reading. We kind of go into this mini lesson. Then we have our really independent practice conferring in small groups. And then at the end, we do a reflection and close. So during that workshop model, we have long stretches for students to read and write. We have opportunities to read high interest accessible texts through our classroom libraries, choice and ownership in writing, and explicit instruction and process skills of proficient reading and writing. Of course, we have opportunities for the students to talk to each other, and we also have many opportunities for the students to talk to us. We want to really think about our standards-based learning and this idea of formative and multiple opportunities is this moment where we have teachers conferring and giving feedback in small group, feedback individually on their work through the entire process versus these very formal moments of formative or of perhaps doing multiple essays. We really think of the writing process or even the creation process of a project as our formative work. So, like I said, it's not creating several essays or creating several projects, but yes, it is kind of writing hundreds of words that never make it into the essay. I like to tell students to think of Olympic divers or pianists, someone who practices for hours for, a 2-minute recital or just 7 seconds of their diving. They will practice for hours and hours. And that's what we do in our classroom. We do a ton of reading, we do a ton of writing, and yet our summatives may just be a small piece of that. And that's okay, because all of those smaller pieces of practice really show up in our summatives at the end. So we use things like flash draft, outline, revising our notebooks, workshop peer reviews. By the time students turn into their summative, you've probably seen their work a few times and have a good idea of kind of where they're at. That's the goal through all of this conferring. So there's a couple high school examples here. If you teach 11, 12, it looks like one of these workshop models, right? You do kind of 15, 20 minutes of reading, 15, 20 minutes of your mini lesson, maybe a transition or body break, right? Kids are sitting so much. We kind of want to, get them going a little bit. And then really instructions of this is what we're doing for 45 minutes. This is what it will look like. And then we as teachers are in that space with them. We are sitting beside them at their table. We are kind of going and being a part of that work with the students. They don't necessarily have to come to us as teacher, but we are going to them as students where we are kind of collaborative learners in that learning space. And then at the end, just a 5-minute share or closure. Now, in high school example B, I have kind of 9, 10, because it's been a lot of our experience that the big workshop model of like 45 or 50 minutes is just too much, especially for our 9th grade students. So you might want to think about doing 2 workshop models, which is like 45 minutes and 45 minutes. So maybe you come in and do kind of 10 minutes reading and you kind of check in with a few students there. You do like a mini lesson, but maybe not even your whole mini lesson. Maybe it's a piece of it. And so then the students really take a piece of that and really work on it for 25 minutes. And you talk to, a few groups, a few students, then you have a full transition. I know for my sophomores last year, we did a full, walked out of the classroom into the courtyard, walked back in, settled back down. We kind of did a journal or like a recalibration back into the classroom. And then I would add to the mini lesson. I'd say, okay, we worked on this and I saw this, right? While I was working with you, now we're going to do this. And they would have 20 more minutes to really practice that and put that into play. And then of course, at the end, that share or closure or exit ticket if that works for you. Now for middle school, there's a couple different ways that you might want to look at this. This is example A, and I know the workshop model when we started had longer class periods and we're all kind of adjusting to this new schedule. And so here's some things to think about. Maybe in your advisory or no advisory days, you still kind of aim for 19 to 20 minutes of practice. You come in with reading, you have your mini lesson, but maybe you have a longer mini lesson, like a 15-minute one on those no advisory days. And then the advisory day, maybe it's more of just an addition or a reminder. Hey, remember when we did this? So it's really solidifying instead of adding new material. We realize that that might make your unit move a little bit slower, but we are okay with students learning deeply versus rushing through curriculum. So that's something to think about. The next example here is a little bit different, where you might think about your no advisory days as really your like mini lesson and like instruction days. Yes, come in with reading, but your mini lesson might be a bit longer, especially depending on what you're teaching that week. And the practice time might be shorter, but then perhaps bumping that up again, those advisory days, and having a little bit longer time for students to work in that time. Whatever way works kind of for you and your students, but something to think about, not perhaps doing a mini lesson every day because the advisory days are so short, but thinking how we can really solidify what students are knowing and have reminders in that workshop model. But the same idea that we are all coming together on the independent practice work time conferring, right? This is the bulk of the time. We want to attempt to see our students about every 7 days. I know our class sizes are large and I know it's difficult to do, but we want to make sure that we touch base with them, that we're building those relationships, and also that we're checking in with where they are. We can use our checklists, we can use rubrics, verbal, written feedback if that's helpful for you. Sometimes I like to walk around with little sticky notes that I leave with students so they clearly know, like, these are the things. Other things are, I typically also have my laptop, and you can like reference like, oh yeah, this would be great. You're working on this. Let's look back. Remember 2 days ago when we did this, and I'll kind of pull it up so they can remind it. We do have some resources like book club work, small group work, and you can check out that video if you're interested to see what that looks like more in practice. I also really like to talk to students in these moments and talk about the idea of, we're not just doing the project to do it, but there's a reason why, right? The rhetorical situation, like, what is our purpose for this assignment? We're really trying to inform our peers about this topic. Okay, so our audience are our peers. Okay, what does that mean? What background knowledge do they need to know? Or are you writing to the school board on something? Okay, who is that audience? What should we think about? Who are you as a writer? What are your funds of knowledge? What do students have that they can bring? And then what is your topic? What do we want to really focus on? And all of that, of course, is captured in the context of the world we're in. 2022 is very different than 2015. And we need to think about that. If they're doing a project, it should look different than it did 5 years ago because our world is different. So really thinking about the skills that we're teaching students and how they can think about them in real world context, not just this is an assignment that I have to do for my English teacher. So some best practices, reminders, teaching the writer, not the writing, right? To be honest with students, they can kind of tell when we're holding back. So being really honest, being like, yeah, that's not working, but this is, like, do that. Being kind and knowing that they are people too, and to be critiqued is really overwhelming at times. And so we want to make sure that we're building those relationships so students clearly know that we are doing it for the best. And I find saying to students flat out, like, I want the best for you. I really want this project to be amazing. So this is what I'm seeing, and these parts we need to work on. And then, of course, come up with a system. There's writing conference systems, there's Google Forms. If you like things online, in the Google folder, there's a ton of conferring tools. You can print them out for yourself if you like to have them hard copy. Maybe you have a student notebook that you use, and kind of keep track of things. But coming up with a system that works for you as teacher is really important. When we're thinking about the process for conferring, you might want to think about your unit in the beginning, that kind of brainstorming, generating ideas, or like, I'm just in my book club book, anything goes. I really, really tell students, like, don't judge yourself, and teachers, let's not judge our students then. It's all about like, oh my gosh, that's so interesting. What's happening? I wonder what'll happen. Or like, this is great. Yes, keep doing that, right? We want to build that academic confidence as they go through. In that mid process, we obviously are still building that confidence, but I like to play what I call like the what if game. Like, I love that you're doing this. I wonder what would happen if this. Or you can call out other students and say things like, oh my gosh, Aria did that too. I love that they were doing that. Can we see how we could connect it to this? Say things that are really clear. You can say things like, I love this thesis is so clear. I'm really confused here. How do these two connect? They tell you, maybe you write down their own words and say, okay, I see that. Think about putting it in. So being really specific with our feedback in those moments. Then near the end, you definitely want to think about like, grow what works, cut what doesn't, right? This is when kind of you're looking at a student notebook and you're like, this page doesn't really make sense because we thought that the book, this was going to happen. You thought it was foreshadowing here, and actually it was here. So do we really need that page anymore? Think about cutting it. Or you can say like, hey, have you tried this? And maybe you refer back to a writing technique, right? Have you felt inner dialogue here? I feel like this would work really, really well. Or maybe they tried something and it's off and you're like, oh, I see you tried it there, but does it feel awkward? Because when I read it, it felt a little awkward. awkward. Students know, and typically you're affirming their kind of internal, what they already know. And that again builds their confidence as academic readers and writers. And that's what we want. So when they go on, they're like, oh, I know this felt off. I should change that. And then at the very end, when students do turn in their summative, that feedback is much shorter and very clear, right? I appreciate this, keep working towards this. You know, you click on your rubric, you circle on your rubric, it's very clear, great work. You don't have to spend those hours in that formal summative because you've done so much process work with the students in person that those summatives are much clearer. And then at the very end, here I have, like, my process online looks a little different because I do use a lot of Canvas, and some of you may have seen before how I've presented this Canvas before, but if you're interested in that, you can click on that. It looks a little bit different online, but sometimes I like to kind of do a balance of in-person and online just because of the many students that we have and what that looks like. So I try to do as much in person as I can, but sometimes, of course, I need to use kind of those online resources that we have. So as you're thinking about conferring, really think about the students, think about building their confidence as academic readers and writers, think about using all the tools that we have together, think about how standards-based is really this idea of we want students to take risks and try as they go through. And also think about how you can use all the tools and all the pedagogy that you know in order to make it successful. Nicole Carter and I are both your language arts TOSAs. So as you're working through this or you have questions, please feel free to reach out. And we are so excited for the work that you're doing. And we are so thankful for the work that you're doing with students. So we wish you all the best with conferring, with SBLS, and everything in the future.